I call the meeting to order and welcome everyone to the City of Kalispell's work session for June 10, 2024. Can I have a roll call, please?
Councillor Graham. Councillor Dowd.
Here.
Councillor Dahlman. Here. Councillor Fisher.
Here.
Councillor Hunter.
Here.
Councillor Nunnally.
Here.
Councillor Carlson.
Here.
Councillor Gabrielle.
Here.
Mayor Johnson.
Here. We have one item for discussion this evening. It is the PFAS in drinking water response review. It's a follow-up ongoing, I think this is what, our fourth work session on where we've discussed this. So, Mr. Russell, do you want to get us started with the presentation?
Yeah, Mayor and Honor, and as you'd mentioned, this is not the first time we've ventured into the PFAS topic, and really going back to 2022 when we brought this up as an emerging contaminant work session. To start it off, at that point in time, we said we're just waiting for, one, consistency in testing, and also in the rule to finally come out. And that rule did come out a couple months ago. So quickly thereafter, started the process of, looking at a compliance plan with the available resources. And that's a little bit of what we'll be talking about tonight, is some of the options available, some of the things we anticipate looking at. So with that, I'll turn it over to Susie Turner, our Director of Public Works, to start it. But we do have representatives from Montana DEQ that have been gracious enough to come up here in case there's questions related to that. And, I know we sometimes get a lot of questions from the public. Public Works is going to stick around after the meeting to answer questions from the audience that they may have individually, if so desired. So with that, I'll turn it over to Susie to start off the staff report.
Thank you, Doug. Good evening, Your Honor and council members. Tonight we have a full agenda discussing an overview of the city's plan to address PFAS that we detected in our public water supply. We have several experts present to help us answer any questions the council or public might have as we move through our discussions. Joining us this evening are Greg Olson, DEQ Public Water Supply Bureau Chief. He's sitting in the back there. And Eugene Pizzini, I get it right? He is our DEQ Monitoring and Reporting Section Supervisor. As our regulating authority, DEQ staff will be able to address any questions or comments related to the PFAS regulation or anything else that might come up or something that I might miss also. So we're happy to have them participate in our work session for Kalispell. As part of the city's response to PFAS, we have procured RPA as our lead consultant to help us through our PFAS mitigation process. Co-presenting with me tonight is Brad Koenig, sitting right next to me. Brad is the group manager for RPA and serves as the project manager. Additionally, as part of our team, with us tonight online through Zoom is Tim Stefanich. He is with AE2S. Tim is a water quality specialist with over 30 years of experience in water quality treatment, including PFAS. So a good amount of expertise to answer questions anybody might have from the public or the council. The EPA set maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, for PFAS in on April 10th of this year. Prior to this, PFAS was considered an emerging contaminant. From past sampling that the city performed, the city identified city production wells with the detections of these man-made chemicals. All of the city water sources are fed from the deep groundwater wells that range between 300 and 500 feet deep below the ground surface. The city did not introduce PFAS into the groundwater, but we have detected these chemicals during sampling events that we have performed over the past several years. At this point, we are unsure of the source of contamination or where the exposure is coming from. In comparing Kalispell's previous sample results to the new EPA limits, 4 of our wells were identified as having PFAS, with 1 well exceeding the acceptable MCL, now currently under rule. For tonight's presentation, we will focus on the new primary drinking water rule and its implications to the city of Kalispell in comparison to our previous sampling events and outline our action plans. In previous presentations and open houses, we did provide information on where PFAS come from, their health effects, and available resources to find other information. I don't plan on revisiting that information specifically tonight, but we do have experts available to answer any related questions as they may arise. So it's not really a part of my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the council or the public might have. When EPA finalized the National Primary Drinking Water Regulation in April, they established legally enforceable levels called MCLs for 5 individual PFAS contaminants in drinking water, and as a mixture using the Hazardous Index MCL to account for the combined and co-occurring levels of certain PFAS in drinking water. The adopted rule standards are intended to reduce exposure from certain PFAS in our drinking water to the lowest levels that are feasible for effective implementation. For PFOA and PFOS, or sometimes it's pronounced PFOA and PFOS, the new rules MCA is 4 parts per trillion. And for the PFNA, PFHXS, and the GenX chemicals, the MCL is 10 parts per trillion. And then finally, according to EPA, some chemicals can combine in mixtures and have additive health effects, even if that individual chemical are at lower levels. Since PFAS can often be found together and in varying combinations as mixtures, EPA also set regulations through a hazardous index, which is kind of the mixture of the 4 PFAS chemicals, the PFNAs, the PFHX, the PFOA, or the Gen X combination, or the PFBSs, part of that. The hazardous index is calculated by adding the ratio of water sample concentrations to the health-based water concentration. So essentially, you get to divide the health-based concentration based off your sampling result, and if it's additive, if it's greater than 1, it's above the MCL, and then you're required to address it. But it's a combined mixture component of the new rule. Under the rule requirements, public water supply systems must conduct initial and ongoing compliance monitoring for the regulated PFAS. Implementation solutions to reduce the PFAS in their drinking water if those levels exceed the MCLs, and the drinking water suppliers must inform the public of the levels of regulated PFAS measured in their drinking water and if that MCL is exceeded. So really 3 main components with the rule implementation. The implementation schedule really started with the final rule being published, which was in April of 2024. From there, begins the period to complete initial monitoring. So the City of Kalispell has 3 years to complete the required initial monitoring of our source waters at the entry points. The sampling must be 4 times in 1 year, so once a quarter. And we intend to start our compliance, our initial monitoring in July of this year. Those initial monitoring results will determine initial compliance monitoring schedules for each individual entry point within the system. So we're pretty much going to use our initial monitoring to develop compliance monitoring, which is a part of the next step. So included in, as a part of the results, we need to include those initial monitoring results in our consumer confidence reports, which are our annual water quality reports. So we'll include those results, and that's starting in, it's actually would be for sampling for 2027, so in 2028, I believe, is how that would roll. From there, we begin our regular monitoring for compliance. Our regular monitoring for compliance actually is the frequency and duration is determined based off of our initial monitoring results. So if we get detects, it kind of determines how often and the duration and the frequency that we have to continue sampling for compliance. All of our initial monitoring and our compliance monitoring is required to be brought forth to the public for notifications on all those results. It's reported in our CCNRs. And then if we do have detections that are above the MCL, then we have additional public notifications required for that.
Why, just a quick question on that. Why, we've already started monitoring, we already have results. Why is there kind of a delay in the kind of hitting the schedule? Why don't we just start that now since we already are doing the monitoring and have results?
Well, the first step in the rule is to do the initial monitoring, which we are going to start in July.
Even though we've already done initial monitoring.
Well, the initial monitoring has specific rule requirements. So the initial monitoring requires us to sample at the entry points of all the wells. So we have to do sampling to comply with the rule. So we will start that in July.
Okay. So it's
So
slightly
what we
different.
did in the past, it doesn't really check the box for us for the initial monitoring. We will start that over to be in compliance with the new rule.
All right, great, thank you.
So, which brings us to starting in year 5, which is year 5 after the adoption of the rule in 2029. We would be required to comply with all of the MCLs as a part of the rule and to provide public notification of any of the MCL violations. So the effectiveness of all the MCLs begins in 2029. We need to be in compliance with the MCLs by 2029. That was a really quick overview of the rule and requirements. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, actually, that was one of my questions. What's different about the rule from the sampling that we've done to the sampling that you have to start doing? What you said it was you have to get it from the source point.
Well, so we'll be, we're pretty much going to meet all of the new rule requirements. So we're going to just start our initial it's initial monitoring July of this year. There's not a lot we're sampling for the 5 individual components and then the other mixture components as a part of that.
So before it was just one of the components, or
No, the sampling that we did before, the first round in 2022 was volunteer sampling for that. And then in 2023, it was UCMR sampling. And that sampling included not only the new regulatory PFAS contaminants, but I believe like 25 other potential PFAS contaminants as a part of that. So just a different rule, a different requirement that we had to meet for sampling as a part of the UCMRs.
just tell me what
Susie, if I-
UCMR is.
If I may, because I think I'm sensing the disconnect. So like all our results will still be listed in our consumer confidence report.
Yep.
The notifications would be time of, like if we get one mid-year before the consumer conference report, we would have to notify through a mailing for any violation. Is that correct?
We would begin public notifications for MCL violations starting in 2029. So we wouldn't, if we wouldn't be violating any MCL. If we were above an MCL, we wouldn't be violating till after 2029 if we didn't take care of.
So
So they would still go in our reports, in the consumer conference report.
Yep.
But again, it's that the rule of the 5-year implementation is that's when it becomes an actual violation. So it's not a violation until you get into those later years. If that makes sense, because they're giving you time to come into compliance. But they would still be posted in our consumer confidence report.
So there's still public notice.
Yeah, well, our consumer confidence report is public notice.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a little confused as the differences there, but and I appreciate the explanation. That helps a little bit. But just if there's something that we can do before and not wait until 2027 if it's kind of meaningful? Like, I understand, like, there's certain regulations that are maybe duplicative or specific to EPA or whatever, but in terms of like the public and that sort of thing, that we implement it before 2027, even if we don't have to, but we are already, prepared to, right?
Well, that may be a discussion for council to have, because you're going to talk about, probably $10,000 every test cycle for a mailing to go out for a non-violation.
I think too, if, as we move forward through the presentation, you're going to see our action plan in response to the PFAS that we've detected in our water source.
Okay.
Yeah. But, as rules come our way, we are required to, follow what those are. So we'll start our initial sampling, in July of this year, which kind of starts for us. We wouldn't actually have to do it for a couple years, but we are going to start it right away. So essentially we are on the go. We are jump starting what we need to get done as fast as we can. So we know what we are up against in our system. Having performed that previous sampling kind of lets us know that we need to do our initial monitoring sooner than later.
Thank you.
My question was different than his, but I got it. Thank you.
It's also my understanding that the testing we did, we used different test kits because there was different ones available at the time. And until the rule came out, we didn't have a specific test kit to use, a specific place to test at each well. But now we do. Is that correct?
No, I don't know exactly where that information is coming from. We don't really use test kits. We sample at each source with bottles, and then we send the bottles to a laboratory, and they perform standard methods that are approved by EPA for each one of our sampling events. Let me back up. For the voluntary sampling that we did in 2022, I do not know what standard method was utilized for the analysis of those. For the UCMR sampling that we performed in 2023, that is an EPA-approved standard method that we used for the analysis. So we knew what we were doing at that time, and it was like a requirement of EPA what standard method needed to be used for the analysis of those samples.
Okay. And also, is any house delivered water directly from a well? Or don't they all go to the tanks first?
Our public water supply is fed through the groundwater wells into the underground distribution, and it is fed through those pipes to the water tanks. And the water tanks control the pressures, right? So as the demand, so the water can be delivered directly from the well to a house, or it can be delivered from the storage tank, depending on the demand at the time and the wells that are on. So it's kind of a hybrid of both.
Okay.
So all the wells will feed into the distribution. They fill the tanks as the tanks get full, or as the water in the tank starts to go down, it calls for all the wells to kick on. The wells kick on, fill the tank. So it's just kind of a repetitive cycle as a part of that. But that doesn't mean that along the water drops journey to a storage tank, if a house turns on a faucet, the demand goes to the house, right? So it kind of could be both.
Sure, and that's one of the hardest things to nail down in this is we can test at the well. We know exactly what's going on at the well, but we don't have an accurate reading of what every single house in Kalispell is, what that level is, because it could be a mixed. It could have been mixed first and then delivered, or it could have come straight from a well.
Yeah, it could have been a hybrid, yeah.
And that perfectly leads into my next question. So thank you. So you just explained basically what I was going to ask. What happens? How does the water get to our homes? My clarifying question after that would be, there's no treatment before it gets to our home currently.
Not for PFAS.
Not
No.
for PFAS.
No,
Is
we
there-
do inject. So we do have chlorine injection. So we do disinfect our water. Yeah,
And the disinfection encompasses
injection of chlorine.
Chlorine, it's just the chlorine. So it is treated, but not filtered or anything currently. So we're just treated for like bacteria and that's it. Okay, thank you.
We have a pristine water source. Our groundwater is
We do.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And we'll get through the PFAS too. So, okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. At this point, we have had several sampling events as we went through, and we are starting to develop a pretty good PFAS data set for each one of our wells. The table on the slide identifies the wells in which the PFAS have been detected from those previous sample events, the latest of which was performed in March of 2024. 4 of the wells were identified as having detected PFAS, with one well, Grandview number 2, exceeding the acceptable MCL for PFOS and PFHXS. So that was our latest round of sampling. So on our table, we have all of the results that had detects throughout the years. As you can see, our Armory well, I think we have a pretty good confidence in that data saying there is some source that we are receiving that is influencing our water that we're drawing from the Grandview well area. We've got detection in 22, 23, and 24. So, and they're all about the same levels for the same contaminants. So we can say with pretty good confidence there's something there around that water source. For the Grandview wells, our original sampling for the UCMRs was a combined sample. So we, like at Grandview, we have 2 well sources there, Grandview 1, Grandview 2. Grandview 1 is the submersible that is outside of the well house, and it's our larger producing well at Grandview. Grandview 2 is inside the well house and is a line shaft turbine. It is a smaller producing well at about 700 to 800 gallons per minute. So our initial sampling for Grandview wells was at the entry point, so they were combined. So you can see there's a little bit reduced concentration for the combined wells in 2023 versus the results we got in 2024 when we sampled each well individually and got separate results for those. So Grandview 1 was underneath what would be the current MCLs for both PFOS and the PFHXS that were detected, but Grandview well 2 was above those MCLs for those 2 contaminants. Of the wells that did have detection, just so everybody is clear on where we're talking about, our Grandview well is in the upper zone, upper pressure zone, which is highlighted in the yellow area. So we have our Grandview wells is just off of Grandview Drive, adjacent to Flathead Valley Community College in that area right there. Our Armory well is located just off of Highway 93 South, right in front of the Hilton Garden Inn. There's a well house right there. It kind of is blended in with the hotel. It's hard to even notice that it's a well house. And then in our latest sampling, we did get a detect at Old School Station. Old School Station wells, there's 2 wells down there. It's kind of at the southern end of Kalispell in that industrial Old School Station subdivision. We did get a detect down there in one of those wells. That's Old School well number 1. Is that the bigger one or the smaller one?
It is the bigger of the 2
And
wells.
what's the-
About 600 gallons a minute.
On that one. As I alluded to, when we performed the sampling in March, we sampled at each well individually at the raw water source. So this was the first time that we actually split the samples up. Otherwise, we were sampling at the entry points at Old School, so it had it combined before and it detected 0. But as we split them up individually, that's when we got the detect of 2 for Old School. Any questions on that? Okay.
I guess just a quick question. So the capacity that we have within the city, would we be able to turn off those 2 wells for the time being, or would that put us behind the curve?
For Grant, are you talking about?
For
Grandview?
Grandview and for the Armory, the 2 that we have high tests
The
on.
demand in the summertime requires us to keep our well sources on.
Okay.
You'll see in upcoming slides that we talk about some options for reducing the use of Grandview Well 2 to the best of our capabilities, but the demand in the summertime obligates us to run the wells.
Okay, thank you.
But we will go through some other options on that too. Okay. The city's response to PFAS detection can really be broken into 6 main action items. All of these action items will be discussed in further detail as we move through the presentation. We are currently working towards procuring alternative funding resources to minimize our expenditures from our water fund and complete the projects we have that are necessary for us to complete without having to increase the rates due to our PFAS exposure. So we've done we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail, some of the funding opportunities that we are successfully maneuvering through. So some really good information there, but definitely one of the main action items we have to step through. We have procured a consultant to help us review project options for long-term removals or reduction of PFAS. And also, as a part of the consideration for those projects, we are looking at the effectiveness of what those projects mean to us, completion timelines, constructability, and operational costs. So all those things are going to be weighted as a part of us going through preliminary engineering report, reviewing all those options. Some of the options that we are considering is replacing the sources that we have DTECs on. So replacing our wells, which is pretty much my number one option that I'd like to move forward with. But we also are looking at treating the sources to see what that means for the city of Kalispell. Blending the sources would reduce the concentrations to a lower level underneath the MCLs. Maybe that would be an option for the city of Kalispell. Always open to hear feedback from others on that option, and that's why we're doing the public. We're doing the work session and hearing from the public on those, or maybe a hybrid of all those alternatives might be one of our solutions. So, one of the steps we are also looking at is addressing the higher concentration of PFAS that we detected in this last sampling event for the Grandview well operations. So we are currently minimizing our operations for Grandview 2, knowing that the last sampling event was above the MCL. So we're reducing our operations of that well. However, we know with the increased demand that we can't do that all summer long. Eventually, we have to run the well to support the demand. So we know that that is something that we will have to do. But in the meantime, we have reduced our operations of that well. We are also looking at short-term treatment units because we know we need that well for the water demand. What does it cost and what can we do to implement short-term treatment options for us? So, and we got a pretty good couple slides on that. So further evaluations as a part of these projects, we're looking at performing additional sampling. So we're going to do the additional monitoring sampling for the rule. We're going to do additional sampling to try to understand the source of why or where the contamination is coming from. So we're going to look at some alternative sampling that we can do. And so we're continuing to move forward with that this summer and into the fall. And then, of course, our action items are always to ensure that we are maintaining compliance of the drinking water rule. So that's a big action item for us to, stay on task with. Before we get into reviewing some of the funding opportunities, I thought it would be important to let council and the public know where reference material regarding PFAS can be found. There is a plethora of information that the public can search up on the EPA's website. They've done a great job in summarizing what PFAS are, where they come from, and providing those support materials for the public to just consume all that information. They have all the information on the health effects and what that means, the technical information. They provide great information on treatment technologies for public water supplies and in-home treatment units. So just a lot of great information on the EPA's website. DEQ also has great information on their website. They have an action plan that they have set in place. They have information on the public drinking water and PFAS and the PFAS disposal. So always a great reference to go to DEQ's website. And for the city of Kalispell, our website has general information about PFAS, and a lot of that is referencing material from DEQ and EPA. So we're just kind of a conduit, if you will, to help people, to direct people where to get some of the other more detailed information on PFAS to the other sources. So you can always go to the city of Kalispell's website, and we will help link you to other agency websites to kind of help provide that information. We also have information on our action plans, what we're doing next, and our sampling results. Our doors are always open, so we encourage the public to give us a call, and we will try our darndest to answer any questions that anybody has, or direct them in the right to the right place to get their answers to their questions. So. Moving on to our funding update. In order for the city to move forward in addressing PFAS detection in our water sources, we needed to procure funding. With the support of our outside agencies and consultants, the city was able to apply for and receive several grants and loan forgiveness opportunities for funding the necessary action items for mitigation to PFAS. Over the last year, and as recently as the last couple of months, we have made a concerted effort to procure several grants to support the mitigation efforts of the PFAS detected in our wells and the planning and engineering necessary to evaluate the alternatives best suited for the action plan and to pay for those projects as we select what that alternative is. We were also fortunate to procure grants to help support some of our sampling efforts as a part of that, and preliminary engineering, which helps us do the evaluation and determination on that ultimate alternative selection. So we've been really fortunate in going out and applying and receiving a lot of really great grants from the state and the DEQ, DNRC, and the federal government. So
One of the benefits of being the first kind of sampling, I imagine, that we're not a lot of competition for the grant so far and getting out and having those samples.
I don't know if I would call it a benefit, but I would say that just because
If we were going to have them, it's better to know early and get in the gate earlier for the grants than other cities that
No
probably
matter the
will find
challenge
out later.
no matter the challenge you face, you look for the silver lining and the opportunities that it presents. And I think that goes straight to your comment, Councilman Hunter.
Yeah. The two largest funding opportunities being the Emerging Contaminant Grant and the SRF Forgiveness Grant that we applied for. the intent of those grants was to replace the two sources that we got the DTEX on. However, as we get further into the preliminary engineering, we may do some hybrid alternatives, and we may be able to fund some of the short-term treatment with some of that funding also. But we need to fine-tune those details to make sure that that's within the funding guidelines. So we are looking into those opportunities also. So there is opportunities to maybe change some of that scope and amount as we move forward. But we're kind of learning as we go, but we are staying on top of what's necessary to ultimately mitigate the PFAS that we see in our water source. Is there any questions on the funding?
I mean, I'm just curious, what's like one test cost? Do you know, or?
Oh, yeah. Do you?
It depends on which method. So there's two separate methods for testing, and it depends on what the detected substance came in and which method. They can range, if we have a no detect and we do both methods, it's somewhere around $500 a sample. If we do both methods and both methods are detected for PFAS, then they'll analyze the field reagent blank, which we have to perform in the field when we test it, and that can bring the sample cost up to about $1,000 per site. Now, thankfully, each time that we've sampled and found a detect was only in one of the methods, so we haven't had to pay for any field reagent blanks of the second method, which is the EPA method 537.1. So the cost can range greatly depending on what we detect and how many samples we do, of course.
Why would one produce a detect and the other not? Is just one's a better one, and why don't we just use that one then? If
So we kind of, is it okay?
I honestly don't know the answer. Do you?
So as a part of the UCMR 5s, we were required to sample for two methods, EPA method 533 and EPA method 537.1. One method tests for a handful of the PFAS substances, and the other one tests for, if I'm not mistaken, the 533 tests for 5 of the PFAS substances, and the 537.1 tests for like 24 or 25 of them. And combined together, the UCMRs were looking for 29 of the different PFAS substances that that you can test for at this point.
okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Wrong button. So as we embark on this project, it was critical to establish some clear goals to keep us on track. As you're kind of going through the what ifs, you could maybe get yourself on a few tangents. So I wanted to establish some primary objectives. And for us, those are to comply with the EPA drinking water standards for PFAS, to provide drinking water that minimizes the exposure to PFAS and protect public health. And then we wanted our projects to ensure that they are, we're going to look at optimizing factors such as effectiveness, completion timelines. We don't want something that's going to take us 3 years, to complete. We want something that's going to be able to mitigate within the shortest timeline that we can. However, considering constructability, materials, and operational costs. So there are a lot of things that we will weigh as a part of our preliminary engineering, but always going back to our main goals, which are providing drinking water that minimizes the exposure to PFAS, and we're meeting the rule. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Brad Koenig. He's going to review some of the treatment technologies that we will be reviewing as part of our PER, which is our preliminary engineering report. As we get further into the discussion and potential selection alternatives, it's really important to understand the scale and operational considerations for each type of treatment technology. Pros and cons with each. challenges with each type of treatment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad.
Yes, good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about treatment. Just how is PFAS removed from your drinking water? Well, there's kind of two different ways. One of them is removal. And with removal, you fill up a vessel with some type of media. That could be powder activated carbon, which is carbon that's really, really fine. It could be granulated activated carbon, which is carbon in a little bit bigger form. Or it's with ion exchange, which is a media that's manufactured. It kind of looks like little soap pellets. And you fill those, oh, my bad.
There we go.
Sorry. You fill those vessels up with that media, and you run the water through those vessels. And on that slide, the bottom two pictures, as well as the upper right hand picture, kind of shows what those vessels look like. And so with that type of a treatment system, you run the water through the media, and at some point, the media just quits working. It quits reacting, and you get breakthrough. And the way that you know that happens is just through constant sampling, how long that media lasts. So with the removal thing, then you were stuck with this media. One of the issues with that kind of treatment is the disposal of the media. The common way that's disposed of is through incineration. In this case, our closest location would be either in the Denver area or in Salt Lake City. You load up all the media just like it sounds. You haul it down there to their facility and they incinerate it. And that's what gets rid of that PFAS. The other method that is used for treatment is reverse osmosis. It's kind of listed in our table as separation. In that case, there's a barrier, and you pump the water through this barrier, and that removes, along with quite a few other things, it removes the PFAS. And then with reverse osmosis is oftentimes foam fractionation, which there's a very, very high backwash with RO or reverse osmosis. And so the foam fractionation is a way that you just continue taking that water and it just keeps concentrating and concentrating that PFAS until the ultimate destruction method is kind of a UV method where they, instead of incinerating it, you use high intensity UV light and destroy it. So you would keep doing foam fractionation until it gets very concentrated, and then say once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, depending on how much you're removing, you would turn on this high intensity UV light and destroy that PFAS. So some different ways of doing it. The RO, or the reverse osmosis, is shown in the upper left picture of that slide.
That would be this right there.
Yep. So we're going to go into a little bit more of some of the positives and negatives and different things on the next slide here. So, we're going to go through this. Treatment is a very complicated thing. So we're going to go through this in our preliminary engineering report in a lot more detail and really look at what's site-specific here in Kalispell to try to figure out, what the best method may be if treatment's a good idea. But just in general, we know that reverse osmosis has a very high capital cost. It's expensive equipment. They just charge a lot for that. Effectiveness is a little bit of a misnomer. They're all effective. Really what we're saying there is how long does it take to treat the water in contact with this treatment method? So reverse osmosis would be a 2. That means it takes a little bit longer or a little bit shorter time than ion exchange, but a little bit less time than granular activated carbon. And that's measured, we see that acronym there, EBCT. That stands for empty bed contact time. Really, that's just so you don't have to measure the interstitial space in the media. You just take how long would the water take to travel through that empty vessel with no media in it. So, we want something that doesn't take very much time because we really don't want to use a very big footprint. I think that's particularly important in your case because some of the sites that you guys have, the Armory Well, for instance, that's at a hotel. There's really very, very little room there available for treatment. At the Grandview site, it's on the college property. There's just not a lot of room there either. So footprint is really a big issue, along with, of course, capital cost. And then the other thing to look at there is the operation and maintenance cost. Once it's built and operating, how much time does the city need to take in monitoring it, keeping it running, power, and all the different tasks that need to be done to keep it operational and functional. So all of those things will be looked at in great detail during the preliminary engineering report, along with some of the other factors that aren't on this list. I think that's kind of all I had on that. Susie, did you have anything to add there?
Nope. As Brad explained, we'll go through all these in detail, and then we anticipate coming back in front of council with the results of the PER, so we can review the recommended alternative with council and the public.
I have a question.
Sure.
We're talking about like footprint as in like how much space it's going to take up.
Yeah.
But what like would be the footprint, like the environmental footprint, you know, like we have incineration, you know, we have the UV destruction. Which one is more environmentally conscientious, I guess I could say, out of those? Because ultimately, you know, we're taking this PFAS out and then we're going to incinerate it. We're going to create another type of footprint. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point and a very good question.
We're going to take that granulated activated carbon and then ship it to Denver? You know?
You know, that's a concern on several fronts and a good question. You know, if you do incineration, that's going to be a constant thing that you guys are going to have to battle forever. I mean, you know, today we know how much it costs to have this incinerated. As this rule progresses and as rules tighten and there's more and more of a demand, those costs could change and it could be more difficult to find places that will incinerate it. Along with just the constant trouble of having to load it all up, haul it down to somewhere and have this done. And then it does create additional waste. I mean, I think, you know, if I had my way without any capital costs, certainly UV destruction would be a better way to do it, because there really is there's nothing left when you're done, and your fate's in your own hands. UV light really doesn't have any side effects, or, you know, once it's utilized, it's just gone. So, you know, that is a good question and a good thing for you folks to consider as we move forward with, you know, analyzing these alternatives.
I have a few questions. One, what's the medium for the ion exchange?
What's the media?
Yeah.
It's kind of a manufactured thing. I mean, all PFAS is a string of carbon with something low on the periodic table attached to it. So it's something with a very, very, you know, low number on the periodic table. It looks like little gel soap beads is what it looks like.
But is it like plastic?
It's made out of something, yeah, it looks like plastic, like little plastic beads. And what it is it has very, very, you know, it's low on the periodic table, so the non-carbon side sticks to that media, and once there's no more room for PFAS to stick to it, that media is utilized.
Yeah, I guess the reason I'm asking, I'd be concerned about introducing something else that might have other chemical problems, like
Sure.
like tiny bits of plastic in our water system that's acting. I understand it's helpful for this, but it might create other problems. I don't know if that's true or not, but I raise the question
Does
for
that
me.
media does the bead particles get
Incinerated.
incinerated?
The whole thing gets incinerated when it's over, and then there's just,
Right, but while it's producing, it may be flaking off or releasing chemicals, or, you know.
well, it's really inert. Once it's reacting, it has such a strong draw that it won't re-release it after it's.
I'm not talking about the PFAS. I'm
Oh, yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about like the
Yeah.
chemicals that are in plastic, right? There's some pretty nasty chemicals in plastic that you don't want to be drinking. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they advise not drinking from plastic water bottles. But and then the reverse osmosis. So the UV, I'm familiar with reverse osmosis at a household level, below your sink. Is there UV destruction in that as well, or is this specific to a larger scale?
No, it's only specific to a larger scale. It actually takes a lot of, they bubble it with some really, really fine bubbles and start, those attach, the PFAS attaches to that, and then you get rid of the water, and then you do it again and again until it's very, very concentrated to where you can not spend so much money to destroy it. With reverse osmosis in your house, it just runs through there, and after so long, there's something that senses the pressure and it backwashes it, and that's just waste. So whatever you backwash would just go down your sewer system. With this kind of a treatment, you wouldn't want to be wasting that much water continuously, because you'd be treating, say 800 gallons a minute, and 100 of it effectively would be waste. So it wouldn't be very efficient if you did it that way.
Okay. And then the effectiveness, I understood kind of your explanation of what you're meaning by that, but it is a little bit confusing because as I understand it, effectiveness, again, I'm looking at the household option, not so maybe it's different at this scale, but that the carbon option is like removes 95% of it, whereas reverse osmosis is the most effective in terms of removing 100% of it from the water source. So it might be a little bit different ordering of effectiveness when you're talking about percentages of removal of the chemical.
No, I think you're right. I think that, if carbon probably have a reduction rate of, 98, 97%, whereas reverse osmosis, as long as everything's working correctly, should get all of it just because it's a pore size thing. So yeah, that is true. I think looking at your levels and getting below the DTACT, you would be so far below that with either case that they're both, for the most part, generally equally effective. It's just the time it takes to get to there and how much money it costs to get to that point.
And the ion exchange.
If you have so many cycles where you need to take all that and handle it again and dispose of it, it starts to add up. So while it's effective, it may not be really the best choice for the longer term.
Sure. And then last question, in terms of like UV destruction or incineration, my understanding is these are called forever chemicals because they haven't found a way to destroy them. So I'm a little bit confused by the idea of them being destroyed through UV or incineration when I understand they can't be destroyed.
Oh, no, they can be destroyed. I think the reason they're called forever chemicals is because they're so low on the periodic table, they don't ever encounter anything in nature that reacts with it. So you have to induce this really, really high heat that it probably would never see if it wasn't induced, or a chemical reaction with something even lower on the periodic chart that can react with it to make it stick to that media. So stick to that media and then incinerate it, or be destroyed through UV light. So it is a forever chemical in nature, but I think there are ways that man's figured out how to get rid of it.
Okay.
It's just not an easy process.
Yeah, they're forever chemicals because their half-life is, years beyond, hundreds of years. But you can break apart the bond to break apart that contaminant and ultimately destroy it. So
Okay.
there are processes that does that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions there before we move on?
Good. All right. Okay, so due to our varying contaminant levels from different wells in different pressure zones, our action responses are best described based off of our upper and lower pressure zones. Currently, our consultant team is working on preliminary engineering reports to evaluate mitigation options. Once again, Brad will go through kind of a high-level overview of our PER components and our action plans and alternatives that we're looking at. But again, we plan on going through that report in detail with council in the future as a part of that. And then just for reference, in our upper zone, that's the Grandview wells, Grandview well 1 and 2. And in the lower zone is the Armory well and the Old School Station well.
Okay, I'll start here with the lower pressure zone overview. That's just generally, as you saw from Susie's slide, the southern part of the city. Both the Armory well and Old School well, number 1, have tested positive for PFAS. But both of these are below the MCL for the drinking water. But to minimize risk, the city is exploring alternatives for their replacement. The thing that's unfortunate about the wells that you guys have tested is both of them are very strategic wells for the city. The Armory well is located in an area that, is in the southern part of the city, kind of central to getting water. If you go, kind of drew a circle out from it, it can provide the water needed in high demand situations for a lot of that part of town. Some of your tanks in that pressure zone are located much further north. So, there's some head loss there during a high demand day. There's some other reasons why losing that well is just an unfortunate thing. So we're going to work on a preliminary engineering report that will compare some different sources and how are we going to replace that source, not only with the water actually supplied to the system, but trying to deliver that water in the same area in the same way so that people don't see a change in their pressure and a change in what they receive every day. Their sprinkler systems still work the same, those sorts of things through this PER. So I guess some of the things that we're looking at here, the city's been working on looking at different well locations even before the PFAS issue came about. So we've had kind of a good jump on looking for some sites, but we're trying to find some new well sources. Of course, we've been working with a hydrogeologist, WET, and they've been kind of consulting and giving us direction on how the groundwater flows, looking for areas where we feel like it should be protected for a longer period of time. As looking at 20-year plans and those sorts of things, and also looking at how the groundwater gets to that location. But some of these places are a new well in the Drybridge Park area, a new well in Lawrence Park, and then also, modification and rehabilitation of the Nofsinger Spring. The Nofsinger Spring, one of the things that's really beneficial about that site is that the city has just a tremendous water right there already. And so trying to utilize that water right would just make things very simple. There would be some piping changes associated with that, but it's something to really consider. So those are some of the ones in the lower pressure zone that are floating to the top of the list. Also, treatment of the Armory well. I mean, it's a very, very tough location, as we've already mentioned, but there's a picture of it there in the lower right-hand corner of that slide. And it's just not a lot of room there to provide treatment or to do anything significant as far as expanding the building size or adding on vertically to that building or all kinds of different options there for treatment. So it would be a challenge. Other factors, we're gonna do some water modeling and look at distribution and transmission. So it may be that we find a water source that's a very good source, but the point of entry just won't deliver the water to that southern Kalispell area, South Kalispell area, as well as the Armory well did. So we're gonna look at some piping changes, bigger pipe sizes, maybe additional pipes to try to get that water to those folks with less head loss so that no one really knows there's a change with that additional water source. So those are some of the things we're looking for in the lower pressure zone.
I might just add that as a part of this process, and we've been asked several times, are you going to do a test well to, drill a test well to then sample the groundwater? And the answer is yes, we are going to. Once we've ultimately selected a location for a new source water, we'll drill a test well and we will sample the groundwater for PFAS before we would invest the time and energy in constructing a new water facility. So just wanted to throw that out there.
That was one of my questions. And can you remind me what the issue is with the Nofsinger Spring and why that's?
Yeah, currently our Nofsinger Springs is actually in emergency status, but it is an aged facility. It's an artesian spring that was built, artesian spring facility that was built in the 1920s. And while we did our best to maintain that facility for years and years, almost hundreds of years, it's at a point where we have to invest significant amount of capital costs to prevent environmental factors from coming into that spring source. So,
And where is that one located again?
it's down in Lawrence Park as you go through down in the park towards the river
the
in
back
that
there.
area. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
It's a great water source. We just have a really hard time keeping those environmental factors out of the water. Right? Moving on.
All right. The upper pressure zone. So, this is probably the well or the area that, is, I shouldn't say more concerning, but the Grandview wells, they're a combination of two wells next to each other. One's a submersible well or submersible pump. The other is a vertical turbine pump. They're a couple 100 feet apart. They come together in a building. They both turn on at the same time, pump together, and then they're chlorinated together, and then they enter the system near the college. The Grandview wells are really kind of a workhorse in the upper pressure zone. When there's a lot of demand, they're highly utilized. They provide a lot of water, about 2,000 gallons a minute in combination. So during those peak months, the summertime when everyone's irrigating, they do a tremendous amount of work. And so it's concerning that that's the well number 2 specifically, has the highest PFAS hit in your system, and it's above the MCL. So that's something that we really want to think through. They're a critical supply, and providing some kind of treatment there or replacing that well will definitely be a challenge, but that is a very important source. So our preliminary engineering report, of course, will go through all the alternatives in the upper pressure zone and really take a hard look at the Grandview wells and what to do there. Some of the things in the upper pressure zone, some of the places we're looking for new water sources. Westview Park, you have a well there already, the Westview well, that's a good producer. Maybe looking for more water there. It's also a city-owned site, which makes it handy and easy. Somewhere near the city-owned regional stormwater facility, which is just behind Glacier High School. That's a good spot. There's likely to be good water. It's on the west side of town, so not a lot of things flowing to it groundwater-wise in the deep aquifer. Also, it's city-owned. Would also maybe provide a new connection point there. There is no piping out to that area now, so that would be something that would have to be added. And then, your new tank site. When we first drilled the well out there, there was a lot of concern that we wouldn't find good quality or quantity. Well, we did. We found pretty good water out there, and we drilled kind of a smaller well on the idea that we would not find as much water. And so, in speaking with WET, we think that there's more water to be had there. It's also a really nice site because it's on the north side of the pressure zone and very, very connected to your new tank once it's online, which is really a benefit. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Also, treatment of the Grandview source, going through the alternatives analysis in great detail about how much space you would need, how well does ion exchange work with your water quality, do some really, really detailed cost analysis and alternatives analysis there based on your actual conditions, not just kind of the general table that I went over earlier, and trying to come up with an actual cost, both capital cost and annual operation and maintenance costs, so that you know what that alternative might look at and can make a good decision. Something in the upper pressure zone that's a little bit interesting, and it's kind of like the lower pressure zone as far as the hydraulics of your system, but you're going to have 2 water tanks. They're both kind of at the same elevation, and they're separated by a long distance, and they operate differently because there are water sources that when they turn on, you always hear that water takes the easiest path. Well, a lot of your water sources want to go to that sheep herder tank, and they will not want to go north to your new tank, but that's where you kind of need to supply that water. So looking at sources or piping improvements that can get water north so that your system just runs as smooth as possible, that'll be another factor that'll be heavily considered when we look at water sources and potential piping improvements to weigh out this factor and potentially losing or modifying the use of your Grandview source. Also, of course, and I've mentioned this again, but the treatment alternatives, anything there, footprint will be a very big issue, just so that some of the areas where you would need to be purchasing land or acquiring it may be difficult. And so trying to come up with something where we can treat the water in a small footprint will be very important. Any questions on the upper pressure zone?
Do Grandview 1 and 2 draw from the same, or are they different depths?
No, they draw from the same aquifer, and I think in talking to Joe today, it sounds like the depth that they draw from is very close. So it is very unusual or surprising to me that one of your Grandview wells, the last sampling round, tested quite a bit higher than the other. It'll be interesting to see if that trend continues or not. or maybe it'll change a little bit each sample time, just based on how the water's flowing and how much water you're using too.
Did I hear that one is lined and the other isn't? Is there a possibility that the PFAS are coming from the lining?
You know, we're not 100% sure of some of the construction that happened on those wells. So I can't give you 100%, determination on what those are or not. But as we pull the wells and we look at things, we'll try to figure some of that out. But really hard to tell you for sure. There's just not great as-built on coatings and linings and adhesives. They didn't provide that in great detail with as-built as those wells went in. So. All right. Okay, so as we move through some of our action items, we are looking at potential short-term solutions for our Grandview Well 2, because in the last sampling event, we did have detects that were above the now current MCLs. So we would like to try to move forward with some short-term treatment options, but I will be looking for some feedback and discussion from council on whether that is an option you'd like me to move forward with. In our next slide, we'll go through some of those costs, if you will, to kind of give you an idea of what it would take to do that. We are not able to provide adequate supply during the summer with Grandview out of service. So we do need to keep both Grandview wells in operation during the summer months because of our peak demand. However, we have been reducing the use of Grandview 2 since earlier this spring, just turning that on as necessary to meet demand. So we have been kind of reducing that for the time being, but again, we really can't hold on. We can't do that very much. Our demand is already starting to go up to the point where we're going to need to turn the well back on to meet our demand that's coming through the irrigation season. Typically our demands they're just starting to rise. As we hit towards the end of July, first week of August, those are our high peak demand. So we need that Grandview well on. But past that season, if we go back into the shoulder seasons, we'll start turning that well down again too. So we're only using it as needed to make sure we're meeting the demands of the water system. So we do have control over that, and we have been performing or allowing the system to operate in that manner. So as we talk through short-term solutions, Brad and his team have really taken a deep dive into looking at what some of those treatment options could be for us. Just to give you a little bit of a visual, you'll see the upper graphic is our Grandview well site. Our footprint for our area is right around the building. So that is our space that we have. You've got the road right away, but then our facility is this big. And then, so Grandview 2 is inside the well house. Grandview 1 is outside of the picture. Apologize. It's just right out here. It's a submersible well, piped underground into the building as a part of that. In our next slide, we'll get into the treatment options we've been reviewing, but just as a visual, the short-term, the mobile units, they do come in semi-trucks, if you will. Each one of these semi-trucks can treat up to 1,200 gallons per minute. So each bank, if you will, treats about 600 gallons per minute. But the footprint of those are about a semi-truck. So just to kind of give you a visual of the space we're going to need as a part of that. For us, timing is really important for a short-term solution. If we were directed to move forward with those options, we would get to work on it right away in procuring those treatment units. There's only so many of them that are manufactured, and they go fast, as this rule starts to develop out. And we have a short time frame to get it installed by the time our peak demand comes on and we need Grandview well going. So there is a really short timeline on that. So sorry to put pressure on council, but just timing of everything. Okay, so Brad's going to kind of go over the breakdown of the cost that he, the cost information that he has kind of accumulated.
Okay, so that table, it shows the costs from one manufacturer, and I'm going to mention another manufacturer after this one, but what they do is they will send a semi-trailer out here with those treatment units in it. One truck, if you will, one trailer can do about 1,200 gallons a minute. In talking with your staff today, it sounds like we may be able to treat one of the Grandview wells, Grandview well number 2, alone with maybe only one unit and back that flow off a little bit. So these costs will change a little bit, but we've based the rental on 3 months, assuming that would be, July, August, and September, and maybe around October 1st, those flows will start to subside a little bit. But as you can see there, purchasing the media is a very, very large expense. So when they rent you this equipment, they will fill it with media, and they will never use media that was partially used somewhere else, or it's always brand new. So that's a little bit of an issue to think through. The media, as you can see, for a 2-unit, for 1,200 gallon a minute flow is $143,000. So if you were to use that for just this summer, you would probably utilize 5 or 10% of its capacity, and then you would be left with the choice of either trying to somehow, drain that out and store that media for maybe next summer, or disposing of something that still had most of its useful life left. So that's an issue of concern. Mobilization and setup, that would be about, between $22,000 and $40,000. Oh, one thing I should mention is the 2-unit or the 3-unit, the way the Grandview wells are plumbed, you don't want to chlorinate until after it's gone through this ion exchange unit. So there is some school of thought, especially with only one test, that maybe it's just easiest to take the full flow from both of those wells and run it through this treatment system, so that you don't have to figure out different pressures, how to separate one from the other, chlorinate them differently, and get them back into the system at the same pressure. I think those are things that we could work through, but there's kind of two options here. Take the full Grandview flow and treat it all, or just take Grandview number 2 and run it through the unit. I think there's just a little bit of risk in that, before this last sampling round, Grandview was sampled as a combination. So we only have Grandview number 2 from March where we sampled them separately. So we're kind of basing things on one test. So anyway, back to this. So the rental would be a few months. Of course, there's a very high media cost. Mobilization and setup is, I think it's a lot, but it's not unheard of. They would come out here, make sure everything's all set up, work with city staff to teach people how to operate it, what all needs to be done, and then they would leave the site. Shipping would be about $12,000. And then we put some media disposal costs in there. That means when you're done with it, this would be the cost to ship it to Salt Lake City and have the media incinerated when you're done. Things to note on this slide is that it only includes the manufacturer's costs in what I've shown. So there's obviously going to be a few other things that need to be done. One would be, we'll need to work with DEQ to make sure we get this thing permitted and approved. We'll also have a temporary electrical connection we'll have to work out. Everything in those trailers works on, single phase 110. It's not a very high load, but, there's a compressor in there and a few things. So we need to provide some temporary electrical connections. We'll also have to modify the piping in that well building. So we'll intercept it as they come together, or just at Grandview 2, run it outside, connect it to this truck, and then make a connection to the truck, run it back inside so it can get chlorinated and then pumped into the system. So there's more expense than what's shown here, but I think the brunt of it is shown in this slide. We've also, since we prepared this slide, we got prices back from another company, and they work a little bit differently. They're a Colorado company, and they kind of work on a rent-to-own basis. They would prefer to sell it to you when you're done. So instead of being something that's mounted or installed in a truck, they will just drop off a skid. And this skid will have all of the same equipment on it. And, it can sit outside through the summer, do the same treatment. But then their hopes is that you keep it and utilize it for final treatment and purchase it through them. So all the rental prices at least goes in part towards the purchasing that equipment that, if it works good and they can show you that it does work well, someday you build a permanent facility and move that same equipment inside. Their cost is a little bit less, but it's still generally the same. It's just a little bit cheaper. And it seems to me that if you guys were going to do this temporary treatment, we certainly won't be able to have a new well constructed, water rights finalized, and operating next summer. So you're going to need it probably for 2 summers. So maybe something that's not truck mounted, you could find a place to store and then use it again next summer and at least get a little bit more life out of that media, if nothing else. But those are kind of the 2 things that we've been pursuing. I will say that a lot of these folks are now saying they can get something here in 2 to 3 weeks, but with this rule and all of this new interest due to the rule, they are getting lots of calls. I'm not trying to put pressure on you guys. I was more just wanting you to understand that if we wait too long, it may be more and more difficult to get it worked out. So, it's all ion exchange, by the way, too. Most of these companies will only do ion exchange just because they can do more and less of a footprint than they can do with granulated activated carbon. And the RO folks don't seem interested in doing rental type things just because of some of the setup and complications of the foam fractionation and other things. So with that,
I have just a couple of questions. With both of those systems, as the water is then treated, where does the water go? Does it go down to our wastewater treatment plant? Does it go back into the well? What's the process for the treatment of where the water goes?
well, in this case, all of the water would be pumped into your system just without PFAS in it,
Okay.
or very, very
There's
minimal
no
amount.
waste stream other
Right.
than the media itself.
Okay, and then with the media from both of these options, would the process of disposing of it be the same regardless of which direction we went?
It would be, yes.
Okay.
I think there's a little bit of subtlety there in how you would store it, if you would store it, how you would, if you would try to utilize it for a longer time, or maybe keep it for, a final treatment process or something if you elect to go that route. Just the difference between one company wanting you to keep the equipment and one not wanting you to.
And it's not then, the media, once it's been used, is not considered hazardous material or anything like that, correct? Or is it?
Well, it is in a sense that there's only certain places where you can take it to get destroyed.
Okay.
It doesn't have some of the classifications of, some of the worst stuff to haul over the road and that kind of thing.
Right, okay, thank you.
I'm curious, so for a couple of summers, we had water restrictions because we had a well that was unexpectedly offline and bringing a new one on. And you're saying that Grandview wells are needed particularly in the summertime. If we implemented similar restrictions, would that bring us back to kind of winter level demand that we wouldn't have to really tap that Grandview 2 well? I'm just wondering, struggling a little bit with costs and issues if it's just going to water some lawns, right, in the summertime. It's the irrigation side of the water demand.
So when we implemented water restrictions, we actually never implemented water restrictions. We just asked our community to conserve water, so we didn't have to implement water restrictions. And, we had pretty good response to that. However, we still needed the Grandview wells. So I think it would be really challenging for us to not have those wells in the summertime, as a, we are bringing North Main well online, which could be helpful and help offset, but I really couldn't give you a 100% guarantee that we wouldn't have to use Grandview wells during the summertime. I just don't know what those demands are going to be. If it's a hot summer, we really like to irrigate in our community. So, I can't read that. Oh, and at this time, our Westview well is out of commission, so we really need our Grandview wells at this point. A couple of the valves are out, so we're replacing that right now. But it's on order, and it should be here soon.
Okay, thank you.
2 weeks. Should be here in 2 weeks.
And would it also be safe to say that the Grandview wells are probably what supplies a lot of the healthcare that's on the hill?
The healthcare on the hill, actually, we also have a Buffalo Hill well that supplies directly to the tank. So a lot of that draws right from the top of the hill. So we have a well up there, Buffalo Hill well, and the tanks are right there. But yes, it also does supply water throughout the distribution, in that area. Water goes to the path of least resistance as it calls for that. It's going to feed those areas first in its vicinity, obviously, but the tanks are also right there to help support the demand for the healthcare area.
Sure. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So the 2 unit and the 3 unit we have here on the graph, when you were talking about like the rent to own one, is it like a 2 unit or a 3 unit?
Yeah, maybe I can be a little bit more clear. I started out with 2 units, thinking that Grandview number 2 was maybe around 800 gallons a minute, and it sounds like we could back that down to a 1 unit, so we could just treat Grandview 2. But Grandview 1 pumps quite a lot of water, and so that's where I got to the 3 unit, which would take the whole source in combination, Grandview number 1 plus Grandview number 2. And the other system that I spoke of, that's the Denver system, that's the non-trailer mounted type, it has very similar flows, where I think it would be kind of the same thing. We'd buy 1 skid and we could do Grandview well number 2, or we could probably buy 3 skids and treat the combination of Grandview well number 1 and 2 together.
And just to review, Grandview 1 was just below and Grandview 2 was above.
Yeah. In the last sampling round, Grandview number 2 was pretty high, and Grandview number 1 was, it was much lower.
And like you said, our sample size was 1.
Yeah, that was 1 sample, because that's the only time the city took it as a non-combined source. Prior to that, they had sampled the blended water of 1 and 2 together.
And I know I'm asking maybe stuff you don't know. I don't know. In your experience, when these wells that have been contaminated, do they test the same all the time? Where does it go? Because we have a sample size of 1.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know that I have any great experience that I can make any kind of good guesses there, because I think every situation is different. I do feel like 2 wells that are drawing from the same depth, 200 feet apart, I mean, it seems unlikely, unless there's something with the construction of the well, that well number 2 is always going to be higher. If there is something with, like we discussed earlier, some kind of coating or something about the well construction, that makes more sense to me, and I just don't know the answer to that one.
And then looking back, okay, so I'm looking back at the, like the incineration. Let me get to my slides so I can make some sense when I speak. So we've got the removal, and then we have the destruction. What goes with what? I'm interested in the UV destruction. So what goes with the UV destruction? Is it the powdered activated carbon? Is it the granulated activated carbon? Is it the ion exchange?
It's actually, it's the reverse osmosis nanofiltration.
So it's the reverse osmosis goes with the UV, and then everything else goes to incineration.
That's correct.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we have not been able to find anybody that will rent the reverse osmosis UV destruction method.
I mean, ultimately, you know, I'm not super happy to make a decision on like renting something for that amount of money, but you know, water's really important to me, and I think it's really important to everyone in our community. If it's going to be a temporary thing, I can see the logic in that, but then another decision is going to come along where we will have to decide which route we're going to take permanently. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I think, you want to answer that or want me to?
Ask your question again.
So right now we have to do something about Grandview in order to, you know, supply our city. So we have to filter it through one of these semi trucks, right?
Yeah, so a short-term
A
kind of
short-term solution to this problem.
solution to get us through this summer and potentially next summer to address the PFAS that we've detected from the last sampling events, then yeah, we're at, that's why we're proposing
I know.
these two potential options that we could move forward with, given council's direction. So, and then we are still working on the long-term solution, which is going to take us a couple years to implement it. But I thought it was important to put in front of the council a short-term option if you so desired.
So we could decide later, even if we did the short term, we're still making a decision later about the long term.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. We're going to complete the preliminary engineering reviews, reviewing those alternatives, looking at the effectiveness, constructability, operational costs. So, you know, new source locations. So all that comes with the PER for the long-term action items that we're hoping to complete those PERs by the end of the summer and get that back in front of council for the recommended permanent long-term alternatives.
And I know this is, you may not know the answer to this either, but I just have to ask. I mean, we've detected some PFAS in some of these other wells. Do we know if it's going to go up? I mean, we don't have any guarantees about testing somewhere else, getting a well somewhere else. I mean, could they potentially just all be contaminated and we're just going to have to end up filtrating all of it?
Well, I would hope not, but we've done
I hope not either.
You know, we can only really deal with the information we have at hand, and we've done a really good job in being proactive and understanding our system and the influences that we've had from PFAS. So we're just going to continue to move forward with that information and continue to do sampling so we're able to address it if that comes to be. For our new sources, as Brad explained, we are really looking at areas to reduce our exposure risks, if you will. When we're looking at locations for water sources, we're looking for areas that we have a really deep confining layer that you know supports healthy groundwater that is deep down and it doesn't have a lot of surface influences. So we're looking for areas throughout the town, if you will, that takes into consideration the shallower confining layer versus a deeper confining layer. We know we have shallow confining layers around Knopfsinger. Excuse me, my voice is gonna crack. So where the confining layer kind of narrows up, you see the artesian springs come to the surface, and that's around our Knopfsinger area. If you down by Woodland Park, that is also an artesian spring through that area. So there are corridors of kind of shallower confining layers where we're not looking through those areas, right? We're looking for the deeper confining areas, so we're drawing from the deep alluvial aquifer with less risk of having sources from the surface, you know, potentially
have components of PFAS being introduced to it. So we're doing the best we can with what we are given.
Doing a great job.
But so I do actually, I misspoke. Mr. Nunnally, as far as your health care question, the hospital is fed from the upper zone, so the Grandview well. It is not fed from the lower zone. So that is fed from Grandview, Section 36. So it is in the upper zone part of that. So I apologize. I misspoke on that part of that. So again, what we've been doing is minimizing that well and operating Silverbrook 24 hours a day, Section 36. So we've been trying to offset that. But again, as I said, we can only do that for so long until irrigation demand really pushes that up to turn that well on full.
Jen?
Can you go back to your lease pricing chart
Yes.
again?
Got it.
I have never been a fan of leasing, and you made a statement that was very interesting to me, that company number 2, you could actually own it after leasing, it would be cheaper. What that adds up to me is the city, if we're gonna have to do this for 2 years, we're $500,000, $600,000 with all the other costs that you talked about. A guy could go purchase this unit, drag it up here, do your training, wherever you sell it, Denver, wherever that is, own the unit, keep your media for the second year, as you stated, use these grant monies that hopefully somebody helps the poor city out with, buy the dang unit, store that trailer. You can have it towed up here for $2,000-3,000. City staff's so talented, we could probably go fetch it ourselves, not have the shipping cost. Buy the dang thing, keep your media. We use 20% year number 2, or year 1, say another 20% year number 2. Maybe something else will pop up and yet a third well. Then we sell it like you guys are so good at with your garbage trucks and everything else to some other poor community that is dealing with this same, and we make 150, 200,000 off the unit, all said and done, because they can't keep up with all the PFAS out there in the country. So we sell it to Browning, Montana, get all of our money back, and everybody's happy.
Okay, so that's not what we have proposed. Because you took this way beyond merits here. Yeah,
So
a
can
lot
we
to
look-
digest there.
Can one look at that, an actual purchase? And has anybody considered, they build osmosis units here for commercial, right here, locally. It could be, has anybody looked into local? Is this just a one-source game from some company that has been able to produce these in mass? Could it be built on a trailer here locally, brought to the site, used 2 years in a row, save our own media, and sell it after?
Honestly, I'm just going to jump in. I think that's unfair to ask because this is an emerging issue.
I understand.
I mean, so we're talking about the units for rental. We don't have what the units are for cost.
And I understand what you're
So
saying.
we don't even have that price there to say, is that even a good idea? We just don't have enough information to be able to respond to that question.
But I think the one statement from the gentleman that said it's actually cheaper to purchase from the other company kind of said the price line of what they could be to acquire and purchase. So I'm just curious. I know it's late.
I just heard that they would like to sell it, but I don't think we have a price on that.
It was a lower lease rate with the option to purchase. Don't know the numbers, but I'm sure we can get
But the
numbers
statement was
to,
cheaper at the end.
yeah, I'm sure we can look
That's
at
the
all the
only thing
different
that got me.
options.
Well, again, it's cheaper. You have to look at your same, as you would on a lease with anything, depends on how long you lease it for.
Yeah, we don't really know what the end cost is. We know what the rental is, and it could be an option to rent to own, but we never asked what the final cost would be to own it. So that's.
So they might require a lease of 5 years.
we don't
as
know
part of the
that.
contract or
We
something.
can definitely investigate that and ask the questions,
I
but
can
we don't know.
tell you most lease to buy situations, you're not going to get a return on investment of 2 years. That's just, it just doesn't happen. Now, I can't tell you what their acquisition cost is for this unit, but most lease to own things or not a 2-year thing, because then no one would ever lease anything.
I'll swallow the unfair question.
But I do think it's,
I didn't say, I probably did use the term unfair. I apologize for that. We do not have enough information to be able to answer that question with a reasonable business model or business plan.
I think it's a good point, once we have the data, that if it's close enough, there are benefits to owning it potentially selling it again, that would, reduce the cost, if that's a possibility, ultimately to the city. And we don't know where we're going to be in a few years if we get another well that comes up. And so having one, if it's not a significant extra cost, having one that we own that we can deploy as a kind of emergency measure wouldn't be a bad thing. But it all depends on what those numbers are and what the difference is on that cost.
Yeah, because in reality, and I'll go back to it, Jed, it's not an unfair question, it's a really good question. We just don't have the information. The reality of it is, we need to do the engineering report, because ultimately the desire is probably to identify new well sources to where we just don't have to use that and have that ongoing treatment, that ongoing media cost, all those things that are associated with it, the storage of the material, all that stuff, so.
So I have two, are you finished?
Could we ask the question?
Yeah, we'll ask the question. Yeah, we just don't have that information right now at hand.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So I have two more questions. One is, I didn't quite follow the benefits versus negatives of treating both Grandview wells versus treating only Grandview 2. Was that your question?
I'm tired of holding my hand up for an hour here.
I did not see you with your hand up. Was that your question, or do you have another?
No, go ahead. Complete your.
Okay, I did not see your hand up.
So essentially what we're providing is options, not really benefit one versus benefit two. So for, as we were looking at bringing up costs for the discussion, to treat just Grandview 2, because it was above the MCLs based off the last sampling, that would be a 1-unit system, and that would be the cost to bring in a 1-unit system. If we wanted to treat both Grandview 1 and 2, we would need to use the 3-unit system. So it would treat both wells instead of just one well. So really, it's a difference in cost and the gallons per minute that we want to treat for that.
So,
Yeah.
So one other thing is just that we have, those wells are a couple hundred feet apart, drawing from the same depth, and we only have one sample point. So there's always a little bit of a risk there that we say, based on that one sample, we're just going to treat one well, and then the next time or the time after that, you sample it, and it's the other well, not the one that we've set up. So treating that water together provides the biggest safety factor, knowing that treatment's going to be provided, so.
and our grants the grants we're going for can cover this.
It's my understanding that the grants could potentially help pay for the costs for the short-term treatment. And we can ask Gino yeah, he's shaking his head, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And then my other question, so we know that we have Grandview 2 that's above the EPA limit, but we have other detections that are below the limit. The limit, if I understand past discussions on this, is due to the technology and the confidence level of the detections. In other words, because I know that PFAS, they basically say there is no safe level. It's like lead. You don't want any of it in your system. So you would think the level is 0, what the level should be, but EPA sets a higher level in part because the technology and the ability to detect that and the confidence level in that detection. Is that why those levels are set? Because at 3.5, it may be below the level, but if there is no safe level, then we don't want 3.5 PPT in there either, right?
That is part of why we brought it forward as discussion. So, in reviewing the analytical process, there's certain qualifications or quantifications that the analytical measurements can reach up to that are quantifiable or, what word am I looking for? Yeah. So, the instrumentation only reads down to a certain level accurately as a part of that. So, and 4 parts per trillion kind of hits that number as a part of current technology. So, I believe that's one of the reasons why they set it at 4 parts per trillion for that,
So 3.5 could be 0 because the technology is just glitching and doing a 3.5, but it's not. It just, because it's below 4.0, we don't know.
And I believe that's how EPA treats it, as a zero detect. Anything below 4 is a zero detect.
moving forward, when we sample, if we did get below 4 parts per trillion, we would report that as 0.
The other thing to consider here is we are 2 months into the rule coming out. We're in the gathering data points area. And another thing that the council will have to decide on is when we're going to start treating. There's, I think with one detection, we're super jumping the gun if we try to put something in place by the summer. I'm interested in seeing how testing goes forward because we may, no matter what, have to treat the combined wells whether we want to or not. It's really strange that they're 200 feet apart at the same level. One detects and the other doesn't. So that's another thing to consider. And I guess my question was really, when do we think we're going to get this report back to the council? I think you mentioned that you were coming back to us, but I don't know if you mentioned a time frame.
Yeah, at the end of the summer.
Okay.
So our goal is to get back in front of council at the end of the summer with the preliminary engineering reports to recommend what projects we would move forward with to mitigate the PFAS that were detected.
Thank you.
Well, and just to go back, you're correct in your assessment in respect to where we're at, because the rule just came out. That's where it goes back to that one of those first slides. That's why they identify 3 years to monitor. Before they go into any of that, reporting of the monitoring or the testing violations. That's why they're giving municipalities those 3 years to do testing and to get a handle on some of those things. So that's why that rule is set up in that way. You have that time for the initial monitoring through there. So you're correct on that. What I think we've identified is we know we've had a couple of detections, and that's why we want to bring the discussion up and available to council.
Do those grants expire at any time? Do we have like 3 years to use them or something like that?
I do not have the answer for
Okay,
that.
that'd be great to know with the report as well.
As far as I know, we're going to continue to move forward with the project. So I don't think that they're going to expire, but I don't know if or Gino or do you have a response to that at all?
Let me use this.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We have, Your Honor, members of the council, we have you right now in line for 10.8 million. As far as I know, that will be there through this process. It may be added to. I was talking with Susie and Joe earlier about options on
Sir, can you turn on the microphone?
There we go.
Is red on? Oh, must be on. Sorry
Perfect.
about that.
No, appreciate it, thanks.
And so if you think about the funding in 2 areas, right? The emergent contaminant money can be used to identify whether you have a problem, where that problem's coming from, and how you're going to move forward with mitigating it. Once you've gotten past resolving it, then the funding can't be used for that anymore. So you can't use it for ongoing monitoring as an example. But a whole bunch of this other stuff you're talking about can potentially be funded with this emergent contaminant money.
So it can't be used for ongoing operations and maintenance and disposal fees, that kind of thing?
Correct.
Okay.
So I just have a quick question for you while you're up here. And it kind of goes to testing, and I realize it's outside of what the city tests, so that's why I want to ask these questions. Does DEQ test for private wells for PFAS?
My program does not. I'm in the drinking water program, and we are limited to, I can only work with public water supplies.
Okay.
When you looked at at the DEQ website that they were showing, that's a bigger picture than just drinking water. Drinking water is a component of it,
Okay.
but there's some other stuff's going on with surface waters and such.
Do you test surface waters?
I believe
all
they are
for
doing
PFAS?
some,
Okay.
yep.
And then in the Flathead, are there other municipalities or water districts that are currently being tested for PFAS?
I can't tell you that for sure. I
Okay.
can find out if you wish.
Well, I guess my only thought is if we're talking about, what are we seeing with our wells, it might help if we're starting to see it in other wells around Kalispell and around the valley too.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilman Nunley, I know that the question has been asked several times about other municipalities sampling for PFAS, and we'll get that information and send that out to everybody. So we think that the other municipalities in the area have sampled for it, but we would have to just contact them and see if they would provide us that information.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm unclear. Is the funding would it cover this temporary solution or not?
Yes.
Okay.
It would, to what extent, we just have to work through all the details. So, if given direction to move forward with the temporary treatment process, then we will start fine tuning all of those details and understanding the timelines and what manufacturer that we would work with as a part of that, the cost for the piping. So we would start diligently working on acting on that project. But
And then
from what I understand is treatment is a component that can be covered under the DEQ funding.
follow-up question, what's it cost for a new well?
About $5.4 million.
Okay. So we're gonna eat into a little bit of that with a short term.
I believe, and Gino can correct me, but I think we can change the scope and do both. We can do short-term treatment and long-term treatment as a component of the DEQ grant process.
Thank you.
It seems like
So, yeah, there we go.
seems like with grant money that it makes sense to do the temporary treatment, move on that now and do both wells. And my only continuing question would be, given that it's the ion exchange version, is if the media is a plastic, the other chemicals that plastic can introduce, which is the three that I'm real familiar with as potential harmful ones, is BPA, phthalates, and paraffins. So I don't know if there's information out there whether this media, they've ever tested this media for releasing that stuff into a water system or not. I mean, it would seem strange that you have a filtering system that releases more toxic chemicals, but if they haven't looked, then maybe they don't know. So,
You can answer.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they make that base coating part of it out of, but I know that it's highly used in water systems across the country. So I've got to believe it's safe, but we can look into that and just verify and make 100% sure that that's the case.
okay. Yeah, I mean, they didn't know about the forever chemicals until recently, so,
Actually, I did. They just didn't care. Something over there. I didn't know if your hand was up.
No,
there.
no.
I'm
It would
having
be
trouble
like
seeing-
this at least.
Got it. Looking for the fingers.
Okay.
Just 4 fingers, not. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, nice you specified.
I Again, Susie,
go
I'm
back?
gonna go back
Oh.
one of the earlier presentations we had. Just so I want everyone to understand kind of the scale of what we're looking at and boil this down to something relatable. Because parts per trillion, I mean, I've always looked at parts per million. Okay, great, but now we're parts per trillion. And I think one of the earlier slides a few months ago, the 4 parts per trillion is equated to 5 drops in 20 Olympic pools, correct?
Yeah, yeah, there, yeah, different ways to say things, yep.
Right, but I'm gonna kind of run down that. So an average
Yeah.
Olympic pool is 660,000 gallons, right? I looked it up.
Okay, yeah, right.
20 would be 13.2 million gallons of water that we're measuring to for those 5 drops. So we're looking for a needle in a haystack. Average person, from the day you're born to the day you die, let's say you drink a gallon of water a day, which might be hard to do. I know it's hard for me. You would drink 31,000 gallons in your lifetime. So what we're looking for is 5% of one Olympic pool, or 1/4% of 20 Olympic pools, is the exposure of what you would have drinking. So 0.235% of 5 drops is what a person, is what they're measuring to when we're looking at 4 parts per trillion and trying to measure or trying to regulate to that. And I know, talking to EPA, we want 0. But this isn't the only source of PFAS.
That's correct.
How many people like microwave popcorn? Stop. Pizza. Scotch Guard. I mean, this stuff is so pervasive. I mean, this is why we're starting to see it in some of these different, we could assume why we're starting to see it. But we're not the only ones with this problem. And my question is, you're going to spend yourself into oblivion trying to remove this stuff to get to some of these standards that they're, and I'm not saying it's not worthy, but what I'm looking at is a country, to deal with this problem, we're looking at drilling wells at $5 million a piece. Every city across the country that's starting to detect this, the investment is going to be staggering to solve this problem. And I think one of the questions is bottled water. We've had that suggestion. Well, let's provide everyone with bottled water, Aquafina, whatever it is. And I think FDA regulates to a much higher level of PFAS than what our drinking supply does. So at what point does our, EPA, FDA, which 3-letter alphabet organization are we supposed to measure to anymore? This is a frustration from our perspective, because do we spend $500,000? Do we spend $1 million renting something to treat something that may or may not remove all of it to the standard we're trying to meet? I don't know, it's just a frustrating thing with this brand new regulation. And I can tell you, when we met with the EPA, I wasn't 100% comfortable that there was a lot of science behind what are the levels safe within humans or not. So I'm just throwing it out there that there's a lot to this, that Mr. Dowd, like you, we've got some time to measure these numbers, but I want the public to understand the scale of what we're looking at, how many gallons of water you'd have to drink and consume on a regular basis to hit these levels, that 4% or 4 parts per trillion. Is that the lifetime exposure that they're measuring to? Or is that, that's the question. What's the lifetime exposure?
It's lifetime exposure.
Yeah, so that's lifetime exposure. And anything below that, well, it doesn't exist.
For
Well,
now,
for now.
potentially, yes. Yeah.
Well, and what I would say is, one, I appreciate the I mean, nothing you said is wrong. Yeah, you're talking about a small amount. And, you know, like I say, we're not in violation yet. We're over the limits, but it is not a violation yet. That's why they give you compliance period. But what we do know is that right now, these are going to be the limits.
Right.
And we have an opportunity to try and mitigate these as best we can with what we have in front of
No,
us.
exactly. And we can go back and say, it was the same thing with lead. I mean, it all accumulates. So I mean, I get it. It's just amazing how pervasive this is and what a small amount, that's what I'm saying, the scale, what a small amount they're saying is dangerous. So, just like to point out something relatable. I know, Sam, I know you drink almost a swimming pool of water a day. But anyway, I just, as I go through these and try to put it in relatable terms, because what does it really mean? How do you quantify it? And we're talking molecular level things. So,
Parts per trillion is a significantly small amount.
Yeah.
It's not a level that we've ever had to deal with before as part of regulations.
Yeah. Like arsenic is parts per billion, which is a significantly, larger quantity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an exposure over a certain period of time, not over a lifetime. So, it's really hard to keep all of this in perspective because you hear this parts per million, parts per trillion, parts per billion, and it doesn't really compute to, the danger level. So, we have a lot of learning to do here on council for this new contaminant.
yep. Okay.
So, and I believe we are on the last slide, is that correct?
Yeah,
So-
we are.
I guess in looking at it and things I've heard is, we're pretty well into the grant requests for, well, obviously we've received it for some of the preliminary engineering, the reviews, and hopefully we'll get the mitigation measures as well. And they may modify as we go forward. It looks like we can also use some of that grant funding for temporary treatment. So I guess that ends up being the question. Do we want to go in that direction for the summers to get some form of temporary treatment? And we can try and answer as many questions as we can up front. What I would say is we are probably going to have to move fairly quickly to get them in. And with that, I'd honestly ask for some grace in expenditures because we're not going to be able to bid this out and then come back in 30 days with a recommendation to get it installed. So along with direction, if that's the direction we want to go, I'd ask for some grace in terms of recognizing we're going to be authorizing expenditures and acquisition of some of this without, we'll bring it back after the fact, and always so everyone knows what we're doing. But as we initiate some of these, if that's the direction we want to go, then understand we'll be making some of these purchases or encumbrances in advance. So with it, I guess that's what we're looking for. Are we comfortable going forward with trying to install some form of temporary treatment up on the Grandview site?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
To add to a follow-up question, would council like us to treat Grandview 1, Grandview 2, or both? Actually, it's Grandview 2 or both.
Both.
Engineering wise, it makes sense for both. I mean,
Both, unfortunately. I would want to do one, but you're saying it's too hard.
It may create some logistical problems. And granted, I've not looked at the schematics of what the piping would be and the pumps and the reducers because it's very early on and I wouldn't understand them if I looked at them anyway. But
As
my
we
understanding
move
is it'd be
forward-
challenging to configure that.
Yeah, I think it'd be a little more challenging just to treat 1 versus 2 because of the way the well is configured as is right now. So with the opportunity to treat both of them, I think we could, reduce some of the components for piping and bringing that into a new unit and bracket back in.
So when you say treatment and moving fast, you're talking about like right now?
We'd probably start making phone calls tomorrow.
Yeah, based off of a single test?
Well, we have a history of 2 tests at that Grandview that had detections. One was lower when it used a combined, I believe that was around 6 parts per trillion.
6.6.
6.6 parts per trillion. And then this latest one, as you can see, the 13 and 11 on there.
I mean,
Yeah.
6.6 is really your blended rate,
That's
essentially.
the
Yeah,
blended
yeah,
one.
that's that one that shows, but that's kind of identifies what happens when you blend, potentially.
Right.
Still have a limited sample source.
So it's double.
You're making the phone calls to purchase it tomorrow so we can sell it later, right?
That I don't have the answer for it.
What must?
I think you can celebrate.
I mean, if by the time we get this, I mean, we'll have another test result.
You know, it'll be close timing. I'm hoping we'll start to move forward. So we would be well into the process of procuring the short-term unit by the time the sample results that we performed in July were provided back to us. So we'll sample in July, but the results we won't get the results from the July sampling till August, September, depending on what.
Why is the turnaround so long?
There's only
There's
so many
limited labs.
limited labs that can do it. However, the
not a nasal
turnaround
swab.
time in March was significantly less than the previous one. So I think more labs are getting certified, so the options are out there for us. So it was a lot less than it was previously.
So I would guess, Mr. Russell, that by next Monday, because we can't take action at a work session per se, we can give a general direction. But would we need a resolution to do anything like that, or this is just authorization within the?
Well, I think just understanding that, we're going to go short of declaring any type of official emergency scenario that we're facing.
You could do ingress, egress, but
I know it. I just look for understanding that, hey, this is the direction we're going, in terms of addressing this under a condensed time frame. And we do have, a scenario in our procurement policy about emergency purchases based on speed of acquisition. I just want council to be aware that we're going forward, and we've done it before on different change orders. We'll talk about another change order tonight that, we'll come in and do in arrears once we get to the manager reports. But this be under that same avenue of just full council's understanding that, yeah, we're probably going to make some commitments on encumbrances for one of these temporary treatment units.
So I get, sorry, because I'm still kind of on the fence on this with, what you brought up, Mayor Johnson, and kind of where we're at and the costs of this. So we're going to do this for the combined Grandville 1 and 2, Grandview Wells 1 and 2. What happens when it's in 6 months, 9 months, a year, and it's another 3 wells? We're setting a precedence now that we're going to be, or is there something that would be a larger? And I realize this is kind of throwing it out at the wrong time, but is there a system that would be larger enough to just do the entire city?
Well, you'd have to do them at each wellhead.
You'd have to do individual,
Have to
okay.
do it at each well.
Yeah.
Or own the unit to where you can transfer it around everywhere we need it.
Is,
Well, it's on wheels, so
so we think that we could acquire this, get it here, repipe, and get it operational this summer?
From my understanding, and I will defer to,
That's what our goal would be. Yeah.
Okay, because it's not, it's after we reach September, then the emergency goes way down because we can shut off the bad one and continue on with the non-irrigation water time.
Yep. So that's what our goal would be, and that's what we would shoot for. If we weren't able to meet that, then we would come back to council and let you know the reasons why and what came about because of it. But based off the research that Brad's been doing, we think we can do it.
I'm just wondering, looking at the effective dilution with the combined Grandview wells going from 13 to 6.6, and that's that effective dilution. And the fact that when it enters into our system, that dilution happens, and so what's coming out of the faucet isn't going to be I mean, people hear 13, they're thinking they're getting 13 out of their faucet. That's not what's happening because they're getting dilution through the system. I wonder if it's worth the cost, and I know it's a cost, to run the test off of the faucet at a few sites in town, wherever, upper zone, lower zone, or whatever, and get that result and report it to the public just for the public knowledge that kind of emphasize that dilution effect, that what's coming out of your faucet isn't 13. It's not even 6.6. It's probably below the EPA threshold. It might even be effectively zero.
Yeah, the only thing, I can say, and then I'll turn it over to Joe, who does the testing on it, but I know some of our water laboratories in town will not test anyone's faucet. They will give people the jars and say, you're more than welcome to test it, but I will not be responsible for whatever comes out of your faucet and whatever's maybe contaminated
Well, I'm
through
just,
that system.
but City Hall has faucets, right? We can do a test at City Hall and, a few city properties. And so we're not doing some private residence, but a public faucet. That's still the end source of after that dilution.
Yeah,
There is so many unknowns as you bring it into a facility of different types of materials that the water could pass through that might already have PFAS in it, that might contribute to a detection or an increased detection amount. So it's hard to have a sample result that you're looking for because there are just so many other unknowns where PFAS can be introduced into the water system through a house, a resident, a commercial business. It's just, you can't eliminate all those unknowns. So you don't really know if your sample is representative of what you're looking for.
and I want to completely agree with you, Mr. Hunter, in terms of the effect of dilution on the system. Because, like I say, we have one well that's over those limits. And we see in the past, and let's just say these are constant numbers, say these are going to be accurate through there. So you get that one from 13 down to 6.6 because of the dilution method at that distribution point. You put it and you mix it with any other water in the system, you're probably down below that limit. So I really want to agree with where you're going, but the EPA's regulation is at the distribution point.
No, I get that. Yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of public knowledge and understanding of what's coming out of their faucet.
And I just don't think we'd be able to confidently tell them this is because of this or this or that.
We could do it at the connection to the public water line, though, right?
It's at where it gets distributed into the system,
Say again?
at the point of distribution into the system.
No, I'm saying at the street before it gets to the house, that point, we could test there.
Not without digging it up and stuff. Right?
Well, there's the water meter's there, right?
But the EPA only want distribution, meaning from the well itself, where it enters the.
Okay.
It would be difficult and challenging to sample from a meter pit.
Well, I'm just wondering.
You know what
I
I'm
mean,
saying?
I'm just thinking that
there's just, you would
I
have
want to
to.
eliminate the house from the equation, right?
Yeah. So then your only other opportunity to get to the water source, if you will, is through a meter pit, if there's even one. Or we'd have to dig it up and expose it that way. So it would be kind of challenging to sample
It
it.
sounds like we might be doing that for another purpose, though. Right?
Yeah.
We might be digging them up anyway.
There's the whole lead thing that we're going to be doing some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing we can give you advice on is what we know. And that is the test methodology by EPA, where it's at, entering into the distribution system. Like I say, I know it's going to be diluted more. I just know it.
And I guess the other thing.
But that's not going to change the EPA's measure
With
standpoint.
blending, what they're actually looking at are those your wells going to like a common water tower, mixing there and then going to distribution, correct?
Yeah, a lot of places, especially if you're doing surface water, you'll bring it into a centralized treatment facility. And then they'll measure outside of that treatment facility.
Right. But our system, we're really locked into at the wellhead source.
Correct. Correct.
And that was all farmland.
Which we call the entry point. So that would be the official entry point, is where the well sources enter the distribution.
Fuel station.
So with that, I'll kind of wrap it around to see if council has specific direction. Sounded like there was, most of us wanted to move forward with that, but then there were a series of questions after that. So are we still feeling that same way?
I don't want to.
I don't want to either. I'm
But
not comfortable
I
with
think-
one test. Like the sample size is so small, and the dilution factor. But I just,
But it's required.
I just feel like it's the right thing to do. Unfortunately,
Well, and again, in full disclosure, we're not in violation.
Yet.
Yet, yeah.
You got 3 years of monitoring. But what I would say is we know where our past tests have been.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to
dollars
capture it.
now.
We're not out of compliance. We do have 5 years actually to come into compliance. The short-term treatment does provide confidence to the public that we are doing the best we can to reduce the amount of PFAS being introduced into the water system at this time, but it's not necessarily a requirement.
Could somebody change all these rules and levels in a year? Could somebody change it?
an asteroid hitting us,
Well,
maybe.
Did you ask, can something change?
Yes,
Well, there's been a lawsuit filed
exactly.
against
So
EPA.
perhaps we're not in violation yet. Perhaps waiting a year. I know there could be some public outcry, but to see where things are, to price things a little more, perhaps it's not that bad of an idea.
The public doesn't care about what EPA is requiring us to do or not. They read what the effects of the chemical is, and they know we've tested at a high level according to BPA. They don't care when BPA is requiring us to do something or whether or not those rules ever change. They want us to do something about because the chemical is in the water.
Do they listen to their mayor on how many swimming pools and the level of it is?
So here's another way to look at it. Okay, we know what our last tests were. So we take action to do temporary treatment based on 2 samples for a Grandview well that would have, both would have been over that MCL. Ideally, the next testing and the next 4 come back with 0 detects. Sunk cost. But would we really feel bad about it? If that's a situation in a few years of, hey, you know what, we saw this potential issue, we went forward, we did temporary treatment of it, sounds like we have access to some funding for that temporary treatment. A year from right now, we're here and go, you know what, we don't have any detects whatsoever. We had $400,000 in sunk costs, but now we're moving on with wells with no detects, under the big one side of the continuum. Would anyone regret that?
Especially that it's not city money. I mean, it's
It's
grant.
somebody's, it's tax
Somebody's tax
money.
dollars,
It's
yeah.
somebody's, it is your,
Somebody's money.
every city
My great,
taxpayer's
great,
money.
grandchild's money.
It's everyone's money. Grant money is not just some gift that doesn't have a cost to it.
There is a difference though.
A difference, it's still tax dollars.
Go ahead, Carrie.
No, I wouldn't feel bad.
I guess for me, I agree 100% with what Mr. Hunter just said. There are a few things that our constituents are incredibly concerned about. Water is probably number one. And if we aren't doing everything we can to protect, I mean, look at all the organizations in the Flathead that protect water. I mean, I think we have to look at that and listen to that, and we have to do what we can to do our due diligence to move forward and at least make the effort. And wouldn't it be great if it came back at 0?
Sure would.
But why not look at doing that and trying to get there? I just think it's probably one of the single most important things that I have to vote on, for me.
Just speak.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Thank you, Your Honor. I totally agree with Carrie. Somebody, in fact, asked me today if I drank out of my faucet. I said, well, no, I put it in a cup first, but yes, I do. I do drink tap water. And they asked about it, and I went on to explain, you know, the pizza box and the popcorn bag, you know, your waterproof jacket. But they were very concerned. They said, are you sure you feel safe drinking out of your faucet? And I said, absolutely. But I think this is something we have the funding, and I know it's somebody's tax dollars, but I think it is a benefit to the city to go ahead and do it now. Thank you.
I mean, we can sit back and look at it, and Jed, I can find someone who's upset because we spent the $500,000. I can find someone who's upset because we didn't spend the $500,000. Come back to the whole primary point, what's the number one thing we provide as a municipality? It's safety. And that's long-term safety, short-term safety, et cetera. So I mean, I don't like spending the money on it. But the fact is, we have a background of testing that shows us the blended rates above. We have a couple tests. I'll be shocked if the next 4 tests are 0. I wonder how did that happen. But in the meantime, we're going to have to do something with that well, because these are the standards that have been written, and I don't see them increasing. I mean, everything's political, so the next administration may say, well, it's 40 parts per trillion. I mean, who knows what may happen. We're just the yo-yo on the end of the string as a municipality, and we have to react to the regulations that come from the federal government and the state government. The primary point is, though, is the public their safety is what we have to look at long term. And, you know, I think we move forward. Like I said, I don't like doing it. But the same token, this well continues to test at that level, knowing what we know. We're going to be replacing that well at some point in time. So I think there's a temporary fix. I mean, I'd be more inclined to own something, but we'll see.
Rent it out.
I want to own it, and then I want our money back from something we got free money from a grant.
The point about,
Go ahead. So anyway, I mean, we don't like it, but I mean, we also don't like the fact of where we're at with the wells. The public isn't like the fact of where we are with PFAS. And this is one of those things. We're learning, we're adapting, we're trying to adjust to this. I think we need to move forward with the information we know, make the best decisions we can, given the public safety is of paramount interest, us as a council. So that's kind of sum up where we're at. I mean, distastefully spending some money that isn't free, but it is free. But for now, it's temporary free.
on the grant money, I just thinking about that difference between city money and grant money is the grant money, if we don't access it, it doesn't go back in the pockets of a taxpayer. It's just some other city is going to apply for it and it'll get spent. So it might as well come to our city for our purposes than some other city.
Understood.
Well, hearing all this, we will move forward in trying to acquire a temporary unit, and we will keep you apprised as best we can. We will also inquire on what a purchase would be.
Thank you, sir.
And it would be almost by next week, by regular council meeting, just as a.
There may be over the update that Susie will be able to provide, because I won't be here.
Okay, I'm just saying a
But
week. I mean,
It's definitely,
we're
We'll
going to be
try
kind of.
to, I will give you an update on what I know in a week.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Anything else on that one then? Are we good up on council on this one?
Yep.
Okay. Anything else from staff on this one? And public comment?
Yes, please.
Hello, my name's Garrett Epperson. I live in Evergreen. And so I have contacted Evergreen and Columbia Falls, and they do not plan on testing their water as this time, which they refer to the EPA guideline as their reasoning. So if I was hearing correct, it sounds like right now information collection is like the primary focus, right? As collecting data, like testing more. Does that seem to kind of be like?
And the temporary treatment.
Yeah, and the temporary treatment, right? So I think it's kind of confusing as a citizen when hearing about information gathering, but then it's like, well, where's the source? And then it's like, oh, we don't have the resources to find out. But yet we have the resources to, debate doing a $5.5 million well, or these other things. So I think to kind of win favor with the citizens, identifying or at least trying to identify where it came from would be a good start. And plus, if it turns out to be a company that's doing that, then that's on their responsibility. So that's not on our taxpayer money. That should be them, right? Like if Boeing had an airplane that crashed into a water well and then caused a whole bunch of issues with it, that would probably be on Boeing to fix, correct? I'm kind of new to this,
Potentially,
so.
yeah, no, and that's the whole thing with PFAS, is it is trying to find that point source. It's not like it's serial numbered, this PFAS came from XYZ company. It is everywhere.
Yeah, no, I've been studying it for 2 years because I was exposed to PFOS in vitro in the first 4 years of my life, and now I have 6 autoimmune disorders. I don't have a large intestine, so I have a lot of medical issues stemming from it, and I'm currently in a lawsuit with another firm for another company that I believe caused it. So I have been doing my due diligence and studying. I think if I could have 15 to 20 minutes, I could lay out a pretty foolproof argument about where I believe the 2 contaminated sources. Because if you look, right, it has PFOS and then the Gen X ones. So PFOS, the EPA said in 2002 that companies using that had to phase it out with complete elimination by 2015. So as long as everybody followed the EPA guidelines, right, those PFOS are at least older than 2015. So that's why I'm thinking there's probably 2 sources. And I think an easy one to just point the finger at would be, where is the closest EPA Superfund site to this location? Does anybody know? Okay. The Columbia Falls aluminum plant is the closest one. And so if you look at how groundwater travels from there, and you line up the wells that have the high number, then, I think you can make a pretty easy argument. But then I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a scientist, but I also know that Michigan State University, because I've been talking to the president of their PFAS microbiology and spectrometry department for the last 2 years, they are looking for rural communities that have been exposed to PFAS that they're trying to do studies for. So our community may be able to apply for that. And I could reach out and see what the application process looks like. That way, Michigan State University would cover the testing costs. And it wouldn't cost the city anything. So if that would be something you guys would like, I could totally find out how to go about that process. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Hi, Walter Roundtree. I live on the east side of Kalispell. Have any of you ever made up a joke? I just thought of one like 10 seconds ago. Okay, 2 PFAS walk into a bar and never leave. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this useful. You may not know, I was on the water board of Hungry Horse for 6 months. They asked me to fill an empty seat. Then during the next election, I lost in an absolute landslide. Ouch. But during that time, one of the things I looked at was their electricity bill. And I found out that a large part of the electricity bill was demand charges. Now, we had 3 pumps, 3 wells, 3 pumps, small, medium, and large. And I found that the majority of the demand charges were from the large pump. I did a little figuring, and I found out that And they had the same system. All three pumps were turned on and filled up the tank. And then they all three turned off at the same time. But I figured out that if they ran the smallest pump continuously, then the other two pumps would hardly ever have to come on. But their control system was not nuanced enough to do that. Also, the large pump was of a type that you could put on like a dimmer switch, so it didn't have to run at full draw. Anyway, they worked out that it was actually cheaper to get a new control system that would give them nuanced control over the three pumps. And it would pay for itself in saved demand charges over the course of 3 years. So that's what they did. And I think that's relevant here because it's possible that if you had a little more nuanced control over the entire system, you may be able to draw from Grandview a lot less. The other thing I want to say is that Grandview 1 and 2, 200 feet apart, very different PFAS levels. Might be the linings and adhesive and things, but it might also be that the PFAS plume in the groundwater is narrow and just skirting Grandview 2. And it may be that if you ran Grandview 2 continuously, it may, when you run a pump like that, it may start affecting groundwater flows. If it ran for more time rather than less, it may start drawing a greater percentage of its output from an area of groundwater that was outside the PFAS plume. So you might actually be making things worse by running it less. I'll leave it as an exercise for the audience as how to test that. They're more of a long-term thing, but it might take care of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And what time are you opening at the Blue Moon?
Hi, my name is Tracy Rickle, and I live on the east side of the valley on a private well. Thank you for, it's fascinating being here, watching all of this, how hard you all work, staff and council. So thank you on behalf of my kids, my grandkids, my not too long from now great-grandkids. Thank you. With that said, I just have some miscellaneous questions. Is it okay to ask them? Okay. So how has the public been notified of this issue by local government?
Press release, we've had multiple things in the newspaper, been website, I mean, we've had,
Open house.
Started back in November 2022.
yeah,
A meeting just like
Press release,
this.
newspaper, social media, yes?
Open house.
Open
work
house,
sessions,
yeah.
Council meetings.
Yeah, all those things that people don't pay attention to, but I get it, that's their job. Okay, if not already, when will the affected households and businesses be notified of their specific risks to the exposure? So I'm thinking about the specific wells and who they serve. Those, like, you know, I'm out here, East Valley. I don't expect a specific, just like as a property owner in Kalispell as well, rental properties. You know, oftentimes we'll get notifications of something happening within 100 yards of a property, that kind of thing, because it pertains to us. As far as the people that are actually being served by these wells, when will those people get something in their mail that if they choose to throw it away, that's their job or that's their bad, versus reading a newspaper?
that's all part of the EPA regulations when we do that, and we have the two different zones
Okay,
that are all related, so.
so
it would be-
EPA dictates that? Is that right?
The,
Notification?
Well, again, we're talking, there's no, we just entered the 3-year monitoring period.
Yeah,
Right?
That goes back to the original question in terms of when it's a reportable violation. Now, again, and it still goes back to our system is a blended system, and we test at the point of entry into the system. That's the test component. Everything else is going to be dependent upon flows of that day, demand, respective pressures.
So it's not a cut and dry, who gets
No.
this water, who doesn't, but there is a general, you guys have to, this water, perhaps it's not consistent, there's a soft edge.
Well, and it's.
I'd
because
refer,
of
and
the-
we've had that
yeah.
discussion here tonight.
Okay, so maybe
about
just
the-
a blanket, some kind of a blanket notice being sent out to residents and businesses,
Well, that's what, it's part of the,
individual, not press release or newspaper.
that's,
I'm shocked that this place is not filled. My thought was, boy, they're gonna be booking a larger venue for next time they do this. I think there's 8 of us here,
The earlier ones, there were a whole lot more people.
really.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think it was just over their head and they decided not to come back, or do you think they don't care?
Oh, I'm hearing from folks.
Well, no, this says something. I'm not sure what this says.
Well, we have different levels from work session compared to a city council meeting. City council meeting, where we bring this up, is probably gonna have more attendance.
And people can watch online later and
Yep,
it's
I
reported
know
in the
some
paper.
folks that are doing
and
that.
there's-
Okay, and if someone doesn't want to wait for the whole process to play out in 2029, whenever the final deadline is, for complete compliance, they basically need to go to the other entities' websites to see what they should be doing at their kitchen faucet, true? I mean, it was on one of your slides. You guys you're not telling us what kind of filtration to put underneath our kitchen sinks, true? We just need to go back to those other websites, correct?
correct.
Okay. Do we know how old the contaminated wells are? The ones that are showing the contamination, the 2 that we're talking about? We know how old they are? So someone's looking at like age and what products were being used at the installation time on those installs?
That's part of what,
That was part of the discussion
Part of the
tonight.
discussion
We
about
had
the
that through there
surveys.
where the as-built from back then, you're not gonna have that specifics unless you dig them up and test them all. And I don't even know if that would be conclusive.
So if the as-built aren't available, we can't get that data.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but
Well,
we
I
had
think
that
that's what
discussion here
somebody's-
tonight.
Challenging to.
Pardon me?
It's very challenging to get that type of information without completely pulling the well,
How old are the wells?
They vary. I mean, we have.
The
how
2
many
that we're
wells do we
talking
have?
about that Mark Johnson said that they had the ages of.
the one
So
that
that was just the
goes-
Grandview 1 and 2, and I'd say get in touch with
Our
Susie later.
armory was constructed somewhere in the 1950s, and our Grandview wells were constructed at about the same time in the late 90s.
Late 50s and the late 90s.
I don't have the exact year on armory off the top of my head, but if I
Actually,
recall, it
Armory
was
was
in
So
the
40 years apart.
1964.
64 and 1990s, late 90s.
Okay. And how long have the current EPA standards been in place? These things like that we're making these decisions based on these numbers. How long?
April.
Since April. Okay. And were there any standards prior to that?
No.
Okay, so brand new standards, first time standards. Okay. And from what this gentleman said, so Evergreen being its own entity has decided not to test their water wells?
Well, we can't really speak for what they're doing or why they're doing it.
Okay, so is Evergreen a separate entity from Kalispell?
Yes,
And do they have a city council? And do they have staff
Evergreen?
like you guys have?
they have a water board.
They have a
They have a
water board.
board. Okay, so everything's much smaller. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? Okay, Mr. Russell.
Okay, just a rundown on things coming up, other than we will move forward on this and keep council apprised on the temporary solution. Looking at next week, again, I tried to keep it short, but things have emerged in addition to, like, say, the Tronstad, that'll come back for discussion and vote next week. Mentioned last week that we have the preliminary budget and wage resolution standard at the last meeting in June. Again, if you have questions related to it, please let me know in advance, because I will not be here at the meeting on Monday. I referenced a potential change order. It's not a potential change order. It is one. It's one of our ARPA projects on 4 Mile. Instead of coming back with a patch, elected to go with a mill and overlay to create a better system. Contractor was on site rather than put a stop order on and remob. They're using the same bid estimates. It's the same contractor that had our mill and overlay, so it's already been bid out for those costs and quantities. We just went ahead with it. It's like $100,000 change order. Anything above 80 comes to the council. Already moved through it to, one, get the road back into place rather than wait another week plus. And again, the materials had always been bid out, but that will be on the consent agenda, just to finalize that. Work sessions in advance, looking at June 24th, we'll have a work session on the Safe Streets for All that's been going on and get an update and a report on that. Still trying to keep July 8th open. We've had a lot of long meetings and thought that that might be a good thing to have a week off. And then July 22nd, work session, looking at revisiting the Trails District. Wanted to make sure we did that before we get into the final budget in August, so council can ask questions and contemplate things from that avenue. So that's all I have.
Okay. Anything from council? Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Your Honor. I won't be here for the 24th work session, but I have a real interest in that Safe Streets for All project. I did attend the open house and looked at the different things being looked at, and so since I won't be there, I'll offer my thoughts real quick on that. I think it's awesome. So much of it, the proposals, the roundabouts, the crossings, and bump outs and everything. I love so much about the one thing that I did object to, which will be familiar, is the extension of Woodland through to 7th on the park line. I just feel that that's the best part of the park line, overlooking Woodland. It's the furthest from any street, and if you make that connection, it will greatly increase traffic on Woodland, and all our investment in the park line will be compromised, and it would not be great for the residents on Woodland. So I'm just very much opposed to that portion of it. The extension of 4 Mile across the river, I understand that that is a top priority for our first responders, so that made me kind of reconsider that. I would like to see, if we did that connection, that'd be pedestrian bike only, with maybe emergency vehicle use only as well. I know there's issues around that, but my objection is I feel like that would turn into something similar to a reserve street, and with our farmers market there, the college, and kids sport, I would hate to see that turn into just such a high traffic road. So those are my two objections. Otherwise, I love that. I love everything about what's coming forward through that project. So thank you.
And next week
I am going to try to
Zoom in.
I will do my best. Yes.
Okay. Anything else from council? Got nothing. We're adjourned.